blurt it out in an offensive way. And it certainly was a significant fact that the ladies of our camp, when we were so fortunate as to have guests, the young wives, especially of the adjutant and quartermaster, used to go among the tents when the men were off duty, in order to hear their big pupils read and spell, without the slightest fear of annoyance. I do not mean direct annoyance or insult, for no man who valued his life would have ventured that in presence of others, but I mean the annoyance of accidentally seeing or hearing improprieties not intended for them. They both declared that they would not have moved about with anything like the same freedom in any white camp they had entered, and it always roused their indignation to hear the negro race called brutal or depraved. This came partly from natural good manners, partly from the habit of deference, partly from ignorance of the refined and ingenious evil which is learned in large towns, but a large part came from their strongly religious temperament. Their comparative freedom from swearing, for instance, an abstinence which I fear military life did not strengthen, was partly a matter of principle. Once I heard one of them say to another, in a transport of indignation, "Ha, ha, ha, boy, s'pose I no be a Christian, I cuss you, soul," which was certainly drawing pretty hard upon the bridle. Cuss, however, was a generic term for all manner of evil speaking. They would say, "He cuss me, fool," or "He cuss me, coward," as if the essence of propriety were in harsh and angry speech, which I take to be good ethics. But certainly, if Uncle Toby could have recruited his army in Flanders from our ranks, the swearing would have ceased to be historic. It used to seem to me that never since Cromwell's time had there been soldiers in whom the religious element had such a place. A religious army, a gospel army, were their frequent phrases. In their prayer meetings there was always a mingling, often quaint enough, of the warlike and the pious. If each one of us was a praying man, said Corporal Thomas Long in a sermon, it appears to me that we could fight as well with prayers as with bullets, for the Lord has said that if you have faith, even a grain of mustard seed cut into 4 parts, you can say to the sycamore tree, "Arise," and it will come up. Though Corporal Long may have got a little perplexed in his botany, his faith proved itself by works, for he volunteered and went many miles on a solitary scouting expedition into the enemy's country in Florida, and got back safe, after I had given him up for lost. The extremes of religious enthusiasm I did not venture to encourage, for I could not do it honestly. Neither did I discourage them, but simply treated them with respect, and let them have their way, so long as it did not interfere with the discipline. In general, they promoted it. The mischievous little drummer boys, whose scrapes and quarrels were the torment of my existence, might be seen kneeling together in their tents to say their prayers at night, and I could hope that their slumbers were blessed by some spirit of peace, such as certainly did not rule over their waking. The most reckless and daring fellows in the regiment were perfect fatalists in their confidence that God would watch over them, and that if they died it would be because it was their time that had come. This almost excessive faith, and their love of freedom and of their families, all cooperated with their pride as soldiers to make them do their duty. I could not have spared any of these incentives. Those of our officers who were personally the least influenced by such considerations still saw the need of encouraging them among the men. I am bound to say that this strongly devotional turn was not always accompanied by the practical virtues, but neither was it strikingly divorced from them. A few men I remember who belonged to the ancient order of hypocrites, but not many. Old Jim Cushman was our favorite representative scamp. He used to vex his righteous soul over the admission of the unregenerate to prayer meetings, and went off once shaking his head and muttering, "Too much goat shout with de sheep." But he who objected to this profane admixture used to get our mess funds far more hopelessly mixed with his own when he went out to buy chickens. And I remember that, on being asked by our major in that semi-Ethiopian dialect into which we sometimes slid, "How much wife you got, Jim?" the veteran replied with a sort of penitence for lost opportunities, "Only about 4, sir." Another man of somewhat similar quality went among us by the name of Henry Ward Beecher, from a remarkable resemblance in face and figure to that sturdy divine. I always felt a sort of admiration for this worthy, because of the thoroughness with which he outwitted me, and the sublime impudence in which he culminated. He got a series of passes from me every week or two to go and see his wife on a neighboring plantation, and finally, when this resource seemed exhausted, he came boldly for one more pass, that he might go and be married. We used to quote him a good deal, also as a sample of a certain Shakespearean boldness of personification in which the men sometimes indulged. Once, I remember, his captain had given him a fowling piece to clean. Henry Ward had left it in the captain's tent, and the latter, finding it, had transferred the job to someone else. Then came a confession, in this precise form, with many dignified gesticulations. "Cap'n, I took dat gun. I put dat bun in de cap'n tent. Den I look, and de gun not dar. Den conscience say, Cap'n mus' hab gib dat gun to somebody else for clean. Den I say, Conscience, you mus' reason correct." Compare Lancelot Gobbo's soliloquy in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Still, I maintain that, as a whole, the men were remarkably free from inconvenient vices. There was no more lying and stealing than in the average white regiments. The surgeon was not much troubled by shamming sickness, and there were not a great many complaints of theft. There was less quarrelling than among white soldiers, and scarcely ever an instance of drunkenness. Perhaps the influence of their officers had something to do with this, for not a ration of whiskey was ever issued to the men, nor did I ever touch it while in the army, nor approve a requisition for any of the officers, without which it could not easily be obtained. In this respect our surgeons fortunately agreed with me, and we never had reason to regret it. I believe the use of ardent spirits to be as useless and injurious in the army as on board ship, and among the colored troops especially, who had never been accustomed to it. I think that it did only harm. The point of greatest laxity in their moral habits, the want of a high standard of chastity, was not one which affected the camp life to any great extent, and it therefore came less under my observation. But I found to my relief that, whatever their deficiency in this respect, it was modified by the general quality of their temperament, and indicated rather a softening and a relaxation than a hardening and brutalizing of their moral natures. Any insult or violence in this direction was a thing unknown. I never heard of an instance. It was not uncommon for the men to have 2 or 3 wives in different plantations, the second or remoter partner being called a broad wife, i.e., wife abroad, but the whole tendency was towards marriage, and this state of things was only regarded as a bequest from massa time. I knew a great deal about their marriages, for they often consulted me, and took my counsel as lovers are wont to do, that is, when it pleased their fancy. Sometimes they would consult their captains first, and then to come to me in despairing appeal. Captain Scroby, Trowbridge, he advised me to come and marry dis lady, 'cause she hab 7 children. What for use? Captain Scroby can't lub for me. I must lub for myself, and I lub he. I remember that on this occasion he stood by, a most unattractive woman, jet black, with an old pink muslin dress, torn white cotton gloves, and a very flowery bonnet that must have descended through generations of tawdry mistresses. I felt myself compelled to reaffirm the decision of the inferior court. The result was unusual. They were married the next day, and I believe that she proved an excellent wife, though she had 7 children, whose father was also in the regiment. If she did not, I know many others who did, and certainly I have never seen more faithful or happy marriages than among that people. The question was often asked whether the Southern slaves or the Northern free blacks made the best soldiers. It was a compliment to both classes that each officer usually preferred those whom he had personally commanded. I preferred those who had been slaves, for their greater docility and affectionateness, for the powerful stimulus which their new freedom gave, and for the fact that they were fighting, in a manner, for their own homes and firesides. Every one of these considerations afforded a special aid to discipline, and cemented a peculiar tie of sympathy between them and their officers. They seemed like clansmen, and had a more confiding and filial relation to us than seemed to me to exist in the Northern colored regiments. So far as the mere habits of slavery went, they were a poor preparation for military duty. Inexperienced officers often assumed that, because these men had been slaves before enlistment, they would bear to be treated as such afterwards. Experience proved the contrary. The more strongly we marked the difference between the slave and the soldier, the better for the regiment. One half of military duty lies in obedience, the other half in self-respect. A soldier without self respect is worthless.